Hello YouTube. In this video I'm going to outline quasi-realism in metaethics. Now quasi-realism is a development of noncognitivism, and if you're not aware of what noncognitivism is, I suggest checking out my earlier introductory videos on metaethics. But let's just go through a brief recap of this position. So that there's this distinction drawn in metaethics between cognitivists and non-cognitivists. Cognitivists hold that moral judgments express beliefs. So a statement like slavery is wrong functions similarly to a statement like Everest is a mountain, right? Like in both cases we are, we're describing something, we're attributing a property to that thing. So, we're attributing the property of wrongness to slavery. We sometimes say that for cognitivists, moral judgments have a mind-to-world direction of fit, so that when we make a moral judgment, we're trying to conform our mental representations, we're trying to conform our thoughts to the mind-independent facts, right? We're like trying to make our minds fit the way the world is. There are moral facts, and in making moral judgments, I aim to match those facts. So that's how standard beliefs work, right? Like beliefs aim to describe or to match the world. By contrast, non-cognitivists hold that moral judgments are not beliefs, or at least they're not beliefs in the standard sense, but are instead expressions of attitudes or commitments or commands or plans for action or something like that. So to say slavery is wrong really means something like boo to slavery or do not enslave people. And on this view, moral judgments have a world-to-mind direction of fit. When I make a moral judgment, I'm not trying to match the way the world is. Instead, I'm expressing how I want the world to be. So, non-cognitivists would say, like, morality is ultimately a practical matter, as Simon Blackburn put it. Ethics concerns what to do and what not to do, who to admire and who to avoid, where to draw lines and where not to, what feelings to cultivate and which to repress. Moral judgments, they're expressing attitudes or plans or something like that. They're not trying to describe the way the world is. Now, non-cognitivism seems to be thoroughly anti-realist, because on this view, it looks like there are no moral beliefs, no moral truth, no moral facts, no moral knowledge, no moral progress. Morality is invented, not discovered. Indeed, for a non-cognitivist, moral judgments are not really propositions at all. The question of truth or falsehood doesn't even arise. If I was to say, boo to slavery, well, you may well share the sentiment, but it wouldn't make sense to say that this utterance is true, right? So it's kind of like if I hit my hand with a hammer and I'm like, ouch, right? Now, yeah, okay, we can understand why I express that, but again, it's not like true or false, right? It's just an expression of my feelings. So on non-cognitivism, it looks like all of these things, like moral facts and moral knowledge and so on, you're not going to get any of that. So this seems like a thoroughly anti-realist position. Okay, so this brings us to quasi-realism. Quasi-realism begins from a non-cognitivist starting point, right? So quasi-realists are non-cognitivists, but then they try to show that we can justify the sort of claims that would usually be associated with realism. As Blackburn puts it, the quasi-realist, starting from an anti-realist position, finds himself progressively able to mimic the thoughts and practices supposedly definitive of realism. Like a lot of people find non-cognitivism very counterintuitive, because there are lots of aspects of ordinary moral discourse that they think imply a commitment to realism. And we can call this the sort of realist surface of ordinary moral discourse. So like there's all these features of our ordinary practices, of like our ordinary ways of talking about and thinking about morality, that seem to commit us to realism, right? So on the one hand, there is moral truth, moral facts, moral knowledge. When I judge that slavery is wrong, you're probably inclined to say that's true, right? Like, it's true that slavery is wrong. It's a fact that slavery is wrong. In the moral domain, it seems like there are correct and incorrect positions. you know, somebody who thinks that slavery is acceptable, like, we're not inclined to think that this is just an expression of their feelings. We're inclined to think that they're making a mistake, right? That they've got things wrong. So intuitively, the argument is we hold moral beliefs, and these beliefs can be correct or incorrect. And I guess similarly, like if you consider what it's like to deliberate about a moral question, right? So like you might ask yourself, I wonder whether it's wrong to eat animals, and you find yourself unsure about this. And so you have to kind of think through the arguments. Now, notice that when you're doing this, it feels like you're trying to make a discovery, right? You can't just, decide that it's okay or not okay to eat animals. You have to think through the evidence and arguments, so it seems like you're trying to find out what the facts are. So another aspect related to this is moral fallibility and moral error. I take it that some of my moral judgments are mistaken, and some of my moral views could be improved. For most of the moral judgments I make, I'm probably going to think, you know what, I could be wrong about this. And this is because I recognise that, some moral positions are better than others, some are right and some are wrong. I also recognise that I'm imperfect. I'm about as likely to make errors in moral reasoning as anybody else is. So, I take it that my own judgments are fallible, and open to improvement. If these moral judgments were merely expressions of attitudes, it's not clear how that would make sense, right? Along similar lines, right? I certainly assume that other people can be mistaken in their moral judgments, right? But again, if somebody's like, "Yay to slavery," right? Woo, slavery! If someone's like that, I may find that. I may find their sentiments quite repugnant, but again, it wouldn't make sense to say that they're wrong about anything. They just happen to have those feelings. Okay, so finally there is the sort of independence of moral judgments from our attitudes. So consider a claim like this: if we didn't disapprove of slavery, then slavery wouldn't be wrong. That probably strikes a lot of people as absurd. We want to say slavery is wrong, period. If I came to change my attitudes so that I approved of slavery instead, well, slavery would still be wrong. I would just hold an incorrect moral opinion. Again, how can the non-cognitivist say this? If moral judgments are just expressions of attitudes, then, if our attitudes change, then it looks like what's morally right or wrong is going to change as well. So, now, an assumption that's made by many metaethicists is that these kinds of claims are implicit in our ordinary ways of thinking about morality. So, again, I'm sort of calling this the kind of realist surface, or the sort of realist appearance of ordinary moral discourse. Now, I should point out that actually this is questionable. I recently uploaded a discussion with Lance Bush, in which we talked about some of the challenges to the claim that ordinary moral discourse does in fact exhibit this kind of realist surface. But, we can put that aside for the purposes of this video. Quasi-realists think that it does exhibit this. And moreover, quasi-realists aim to show that the realist surface can be vindicated, that these sort of realist-sounding claims can be justified, but from within a non-cognitivist perspective. So the quasi-realist wants to say it's perfectly legitimate for a non-cognitivist to talk about things like moral beliefs, moral truth, moral facts, moral progress, moral knowledge, etc. Right? So essentially, quasi-realism consists of the following claims. First, moral judgments are non-cognitive. They are expressions of attitude, or commitments to plans, or something like that. Second, moral discourse has a realist surface form. And finally, the realist surface can be vindicated from within the non-cognitivist perspective. So these claims concerning truth and knowledge, fallibility and error, independence, these are all perfectly legitimate. Now, I do want to point out that a large part of the quasi-realist literature involves attempting to respond to the Frege-Geach problem for non-cognitivism. If you're not aware of what the Frege-Geach problem is, I talk about it in an earlier video on emotivism. Now, I'm going to do a separate video on the responses to the Frege-Geach problem. I'm putting that aside here because the literature on the Frege-Geach problem gets extremely technical, and it's a problem for all non-cognitivists, not just quasi-realists. And I think it's kind of beside the point for the purposes of presenting the basic ideas of quasi-realism, which is what I want to do here. So yeah, my point is I'm not going to talk about that here, basically. But if you're interested in the Frege-Geach problem, I do hope to do a video on that at some point in the future. Although, bear in mind I've been planning this video for like 5 years and only just got around to doing it. So who knows when that's going to be. Okay then, let's talk about quasi-realism. So the goal of quasi-realism is to start with non-cognitivist tools and then mimic the thoughts and practices associated with realism. But this raises an immediate question, right? If the quasi-realist is successful, then she's going to vindicate moral belief, moral truth, moral facts, moral progress, moral knowledge, all of that stuff. But isn't that just realism, right? So the danger here is that if the quasi-realist is able to do and say everything that the realist can do and say, then hasn't she just vindicated realism, right? What's quasi about this, right? Where's the quasi-realism here? Once you start saying that, people have true moral beliefs that represent moral facts, blah, 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 right? Once you start saying stuff like that, isn't that just realism? This is a challenge that has received quite a lot of discussion in the literature. And there are some philosophers who think that quasi-realism does just collapse into realism. So a common way of drawing a distinction between the quasi-realist and the genuine realist is that there's a distinction between the types of metaethical explanations that realists and quasi-realists will give. So we've seen this idea that moral discourse has a kind of realist surface. And the question is, how do we explain this? Right? How do we explain the fact that there is moral truth and that people have moral knowledge? How do we explain this stuff? Well, realists will try to explain it in the following way. I'm drawing here on Terence Cuneo's article on quasi-realism. Realists are committed to 3 claims, according to Cuneo. So first, there's a claim about representation. Right? Moral judgments have representational content. They purport to represent moral facts. So essentially, moral judgments describe things, right? They express beliefs or propositions with the mind to world direction of fit. Second, a claim about reality, the way the world is. There are in fact moral facts. And then third, when explaining the realist surface, we appeal to these claims about representation and reality. And the key point here is explanation, right? The commitment to explanation. We explain the realist surface by appealing to the semantic and metaphysical theses of realism. So if we take, for instance, moral error, right? We want to explain the fact that some people have the wrong beliefs, some people are incorrect, some people make errors, including me, right? I expect that I will make errors. So how do we explain this? Well, a realist will say it's explained by the fact that there are these mind-independent moral facts that we sometimes incorrectly represent. So, Verity judges that slavery is morally permissible, but it's a moral fact, a mind-independent moral fact that slavery is wrong. She has attempted to represent the world one way, but in fact it's not that way, and that's what explains her error. And so on. I don't think we need to go into this in too much detail. It's fairly easy to see how the realist surface is explained by realism. Okay, what about quasi-realism? Well, the quasi-realist has a non-cognitivist starting point. So their key claim is a claim about attitude. Moral judgments express attitudinal states. States of approbation or disapprobation, states of commendation and condemnation. To judge that abortion is wrong is to express the attitude of disapprobation to abortion. Then the quasi-realist will try to show that from this starting point, we can also embrace claims about representation and reality. So we can show that moral judgments function like beliefs that can be true or false. We can show that moral judgments represent moral facts. This is what distinguishes quasi-realism from earlier forms of non-cognitivism. But there's still a difference between quasi-realism and realism, because the quasi-realist rejects the realist's explanatory claim. The quasi-realist endorses what we can call no explanation, right? So when explaining the realist surface, we do not appeal to the claims about representation and reality. Instead, we appeal to the claim about attitude. So the semantic and metaphysical claims associated with realism do no explanatory work. We can have moral truth and moral knowledge and moral progress and all that stuff. Yes, we can have that, but we need to explain this by appealing to nothing more than the sort of foundation of non-cognitive attitudes. So the quasi-realist wants to mimic the thoughts and practices of the realist, with one exception. Right, the exception is the kind of explanatory story that they give. They're not going to start with, claims about mind-independent moral facts. They're going to start with claims about our sentiments, our attitudes. As Blackburn says in the Quasi-Realist project, the explanations offered make no essential or irreducible appeal to moral properties or facts. He similarly writes that quasi-realism refuses to give ethical facts a typical explanatory role. A representation of something as F is typically explained by the fact that it is F. A representation answers to what is representational. I hold that ethical facts do not play this explanatory role. For example, I know that Mount Everest is the tallest mountain on Earth. Part of the explanation for why I have this belief and for why it constitutes knowledge is the mind-independent fact that Mount Everest is the tallest mountain. And so it's like that mind-independent fact comes first, causally speaking, right? And then my representation answers to that. So while the quasi-realist is going to give you moral fact, they're not going to play that sort of explanatory role. Similarly, Alan Gibbard seems to have a similar view on the distinction between realism and quasi-realism. He says that quasi-realists, and I quote, can't mimic the claim that understanding normative properties and relations as objective matters of fact is basic to explaining how moral judgments of wrongness work. So, yeah, I guess in a sense, realists, genuine realists, will take moral truths and moral facts as being kind of just out there, regardless, right? The moral truths and moral facts are kind of the foundational, the moral facts are foundational. We appeal to these in explaining our moral discourse. The quasi-realist has a different starting point. She begins with our attitudes, our states of approval and disapproval. And on that basis, we then have to kind of build up, we have to construct the moral truth and the moral facts. So if this can be made to work, then the appeal of this position should be obvious. On the one hand, realism is seen as being the kind of common sense position, or that's how metaethicists often see it. Anti-realism, certainly, traditional non-cognitivism, it makes morality dependent on our whims, on whatever our attitudes happen to be. And surely, a lot of people think, surely this can't be right. When we engage in moral debate, whether or not abortion is permissible, that's not like debating which flavour of ice cream is best. So, the thought is anti-realists can't take their moral commitments seriously. Well, realists overcome this problem by postulating moral facts that ground our moral beliefs. Moral facts are the external authority against which our moral beliefs are judged. And yet, this notion of moral facts, it raises some serious metaphysical and epistemological problems. What exactly are moral values? How do we fit them into a naturalistic view of the world? How do we know about them? We've talked about these difficulties previously in previous videos, so I won't go into that in too much detail here. But you know the usual problems with realism. Well, the quasi-realist says, look, you can have moral facts, you can have all of these things that realists want, but without making any of these robust metaphysical commitments, without kind of having these metaphysical and epistemological problems. Our sentiments, our attitudes, they provide a perfectly secure foundation for moral facts and moral knowledge. So, quasi-realism is presented as the best of both worlds. Well, that's the idea, anyway. That's the plan. But how exactly is it supposed to work? Well, I should say, first of all, that quasi-realism is a sort of general project, right? There are going to be lots of different ways of trying to vindicate the realist surface from a non-cognitivist starting point. So I'm just going to present one way of doing it, okay? But there may be, so just bear in mind, like, there may be other ways of doing this. So a very common move for quasi-realists is to adopt deflationary theory, a deflationary theory of truth. So we need to talk about truth a little bit now. The standard view of truth in philosophy is correspondence theory. And I guess this is probably like I don't actually know. This kind of view seems intuitive, right? So, if you were to ask laypersons, it seems like this might be, but who knows? I've not gone out and asked them. But it is the standard view of truth in philosophy. So, correspondence theory. Correspondence theory says that a proposition is true just in case it corresponds to a state of affairs in the world, right? Just in case it matches the way the world is. So, if you take the proposition, the cat is on the mat, well, how is this working? Well, it's like it picks out certain objects, right, like a cat and a mat, and it depicts them in a particular relation. The relation of onness, one is on the other, right? So this proposition is true just in case there really are such objects and they really do stand in such a relation. So you can, it's like you can draw an arrow, as it were, right, from like the picture provided by the proposition. You can draw an arrow to like states of affairs in the world, and the truth of the proposition consists in its correspondence to these states of affairs. Now the thing is that if a sentence is not even in the business of depicting the world, then on this view it can't be true or false, right? Like, if I hit my hand with a hammer and I'm like, ouch, right? I'm not trying to describe the way the world is. I'm just expressing my feelings. So it wouldn't make sense to say that's true or false. And of course, this is what the noncognitivist says about moral judgments. For a noncognitivist, when I say abortion is wrong, that means something like boo to abortion. And boo to abortion, well, that boo doesn't correspond to anything in the world. There's no correspondence relation between like booing and the world. Maybe you could say that it like corresponds to my attitudes, I suppose, but it's an expression of my attitudes. It's not a representation of them, right? Like if I was to say boo to abortion, in saying boo, I'm not representing my own attitudes. I'm just expressing my feelings about abortion. So on the correspondence theory, it can't be true or false. And, this is how moral judgments work, according to the non-cognitivist. Indeed, non-cognitivism is often defined as the view that moral judgments cannot be true or false. Obviously, quasi-realism does raise some issues for that definition, because quasi-realists are non-cognitivists who think that moral judgments can be true or false. But I suppose we might say, well, maybe one way to put this is that on non-cognitivism, moral judgments cannot be true or false per the correspondence theory of truth. But there are other approaches to truth. Deflationary theories of truth have always been a very popular minority position. The basic idea of deflationism is that truth is not a substantive property. To say that a proposition is true is equivalent in meaning, in some important sense, to just saying the proposition, right? So like P is true is just equivalent to P. So deflationists will say that the truth predicate, the term true, is a very useful linguistic tool, right? Like, let's say that Sydney has given a long speech, which I agree with. How do I signal my agreement? Well, one option would be to repeat everything that Sydney says. That would be quite cumbersome, take a lot of time. A much simpler option would be to just say, oh, what Sydney said, that was true, right? So talk of truth and falsehood helps to kind of streamline our language, right? Rather than just having to repeat everything, we can just like say, oh, that's true. Or in signaling my agreement with the Bible, for instance, if I'm a Christian, I can just be like, the Bible is true, instead of just repeating everything in it. Also, we use the truth predicate as a tool of emphasis, right? Let's say we're arguing about, the election. We're disputing whether or not Donald Trump lost the popular vote. I might, in response to a disagreement, I might say, no, it's true that he lost the popular vote. Well, in that case, the use of true is a kind of foot stomping. To say that it's true he lost the popular vote, that describes the world exactly the same way as just saying he lost the popular vote, but I'm like using the term true for emphasis. Now, of course, everybody agrees that the truth predicate is used in these ways. What's distinctive about deflationism is the idea that in some important sense, this is all there is to say about truth, right? Truth is not really a substantive property. It's not doing any significant explanatory work. No general account can be given of what makes propositions true. Like when I say snow is white is true, I'm just saying snow is white. Now, if this is right, then a non-cognitivist can talk about moral truth and moral falsehood. Because although we might say that moral propositions are just expressions of attitudes, so we might sort of understand the meaning of abortion is wrong as being like boo to abortion. What I'm saying is like a kind of, it's a grammatical sentence, right? Like it has a propositional form, A is B, right? Like slavery is wrong, abortion is wrong. And all that is required to get truth and falsehood, right, from this is that we're willing to assert moral such claims. We're willing to assert moral claims. To say that it is true that slavery is wrong, that has the same content as just saying slavery is wrong. So that if we adopt a deflationary theory, the non-cognitivist has an easy way to get moral truth. And we can apply the same idea to things like facts and properties. So let's take a claim like it is a fact that P, it is a fact that snow is white. Well, on a deflationary view of facts, that's equivalent to just asserting P. It's equivalent to just asserting snow is white. So to say that it is a fact that slavery is wrong, that's just to assert that slavery is wrong. As long as you're prepared to say that slavery is wrong, and most people are prepared to say that, then you should be happy to say that it's a fact that slavery is wrong. Similarly, with respect to properties, we can say that X has the property of being F. That's just equivalent to saying X is F. I noticed that this slide, for some reason, I typed X has the property of F equals X is Y. Obviously, I should have put X has the property of F equals X is F. That should be an F there, not a Y. So, slavery has the property of wrongness. That's equivalent to asserting that slavery is wrong. And that's all there is to say about properties. For every predicate, there is a corresponding property, but there's no deep metaphysical commitments required here. Slavery has the property of wrongness because slavery is wrong. That's it. So Blackburn summarizes all of this. He says, I quote, he says, "The first step is to allow propositional forms of discourse, and once that is done, we have the moral predicate, and properties are simply abstractions from predicates." So deflationism gives us an easy route to many claims that are often treated as distinctive of realism. If you're willing to sincerely assert that slavery is wrong, and I assume you are willing to assert this, then you think it's true that slavery is wrong. You think it's a fact that slavery is wrong. You think that slavery has the property of wrongness. So that's the idea of deflationism. It's worth noting that non-cognitivism and deflationism make quite a natural pairing because they share a common motivation. Both the non-cognitivist and the deflationist are resistant to metaphysical theorizing, right? In that they deny that we need to explain certain concepts like goodness and truth and so on. They deny that we need to explain these things by postulating a mind-independent realm of things that these concepts represent. And so instead what they do is they focus on how these concepts are used in ordinary language. They ask all right, what functions do terms like good and true play? James Dreier, in his Metaethics and the Problem of Creeping Minimalism, says that the non-cognitivist and deflationist both approach matters in this way, and I quote, he says that they will say something like this: "I will not tell you anything about the property associated with this predicate," they always say, "because this is not one of those predicates that you can come to understand by being supplied with its denotation. Instead, I will tell you what people do by calling things good or true, and bad or false." Okay, there's an obvious concern about all of this, which is, well, from this deflationist perspective, aren't those who disagree with us just as entitled, aren't they entitled to say all the same things that we're entitled to say? So suppose that Verity sincerely believes that slavery is permissible, So she asserts that slavery is permissible. Well, if Verity is a quasi-realist, then she applies the deflationary theory of truth, and she's also going to say it's true that slavery is permissible. It's a fact that slavery is permissible. Slavery has the property of permissibility, and so on. So we seem to have a straightforward relativism here, because Verity sincerely asserts that slavery is permissible, so it's true for her that slavery is permissible. So the key point here is that in saying that slavery is permissible, Verity is wrong, because slavery isn't permissible. Now, if that seems like a bit of a cheat, then the key thing to notice is that, we don't get that conclusion. We don't get the conclusion that slavery is wrong from the deflationary theory of truth, right? So in order to show that Verity is incorrect in saying that slavery is permissible, we would have to engage in moral debate. But notice that robust realists are in exactly the same position here. If Verity is a robust realist, then she will say that it is an objective, stance-independent fact that slavery is permissible, and that this fact explains the truth of the judgment that slavery is permissible and the falsity of the judgment that slavery is wrong. Again, the only way a robust realist can show that Verity's judgment about slavery is incorrect is to engage in moral debate, right? To explain what it is that's wrong with slavery. I guess the general point here is that you're not going to convert people's moral sensibilities by attacking their semantics. A semantic theory cannot decide whether or not slavery is wrong. Whether you're a correspondence theorist, a deflationist, whether you're a moral realist or a quasi-realist, the statements, right, slavery is wrong and slavery is permissible, semantically they're going to be treated the same. To get an answer as to whether or not slavery is wrong, we have to engage in first order moral debate. So it's if Verity is a quasi-realist, then in a sense she is entitled to say it's true that slavery is permissible. But in the same sense, if Verity is a robust realist, then she's entitled to say that it's an objective fact that slavery is permissible, and that this fact explains the truth of the judgment that slavery is permissible. Now, of course, all of this brings us to the question, how do we show that Verity is wrong? Or how can it be the case that Verity is mistaken? If we're not explaining the truth or falsehood of moral judgments in terms of mind-independent moral facts, how do we account for moral error? And this brings us to these other aspects of the realist surface. So deflationism allows me to say that there are moral truths and moral facts, but that doesn't really get us very far, because deflationism also tells me that in saying that there are moral truths and moral facts, I'm not really saying anything substantive, right? So what about moral fallibility, moral error, moral progress? I take it that some of Verity's moral views are incorrect, and I also recognise that some of my moral views might be incorrect. I hope that my moral views might improve over time. How is the quasi-realist to explain this? Well, first, there are a number of traits that I admire in the moral thinking of others. And I recognise that when people are lacking in these traits, they tend to end up endorsing views that I find repugnant. Blackburn gives the list of these kind of basic values or basic standards that we want our attitudes to be guided by. He says information, sensitivity, maturity, imagination, and coherence. Elsewhere, Blackburn says that we want our attitudes to be livable, unfragmented, developed, consistent, and coherent. So, I can see that when people lack relevant information about a case, for example, they are led to incorrect moral conclusions. They're led to moral conclusions that I disagree with. So consider an anti-vaxxer who refuses to vaccinate her children. She loves her children and believes herself to be helping them. Because she thinks that vaccines cause autism, she refuses to vaccinate them against things like tetanus and so on. And we can see that she thinks she's helping them, but in fact she's putting them at unnecessary risk because she has the wrong information, right? So she's lacking information, so she's come to an incorrect conclusion, an incorrect moral conclusion. Or when people lack sensitivity, they may fail to see things from another person's perspective. Imagine the sort of person who says about, depression, right? Oh, people with depression, they should just stop whining and get over it. So somebody who says something like that, again, we can we can see, okay, this person is just insensitive to, the experiences of others, to what it's like to be, to have another person's perspective. And again, that's led them to this repugnant conclusion that people with depression should just stop whining, right? So if a person is deficient with respect to these traits of information, sensitivity, maturity, and so on, they are likely to come to moral conclusions that I take to be false. So we can specify certain traits that reliably lead to correct moral conclusions and traits that tend to lead to the wrong moral conclusions. Moreover, notice, I know that I am also sometimes deficient in such respects because I'm only human, I'm not perfect. And this means that I must take my own moral views to be fallible. I must be open to changing my mind and so making an improvement. So we've explained moral fallibility and moral progress in terms of our sensibilities. I approve of, right, these traits of gathering information, of being sensitive, of thinking through things in a mature way, etc. And this explains moral error, moral fallibility. My moral sensibility includes attitudes that allow me to specify standards for improvement. Given that I value consistency, I can see that if my views are inconsistent, I would improve by removing the inconsistency. Given that I value the practice of providing justification for my moral views, I can see that if my views rest on arbitrary distinctions, they would improve by removing the arbitrariness. With this in mind, we can define the best possible set of attitudes. Blackburn defines this as the set that would result from taking all possible opportunities for improvement of attitude, where we are guided by these standards of information, sensitivity, maturity, and so on. I'm only human, I have plenty of cognitive flaws, I know that in various ways I lack information, I make arbitrary distinctions, I fail to be perfectly coherent, and these traits are bad by the standards of my own sensibility. So I can imagine improving my attitudes so as to eliminate these problems, and we can call the resulting set of perfected attitudes M. Now I can say, well, insofar as people's views deviate from M, they are making an error, and insofar as people's views get closer to M, they're making moral progress. And of course, the same is true for myself. I know that I'm going to be flawed by my own standards. I should expect that my own views do not yet match M, and that accounts for my sense of moral fallibility. And it accounts for my hope that my moral views will get closer to the truth over time, right? That I'm over time, I hope I'm going to get closer and closer to M, to the best possible set of attitudes. Okay, well that's moral error, moral progress. The final aspect of the realist surface is the notion that the moral truths are in some sense independent of our attitudes. So in ordinary moral discourse, claims like S would be utterly absurd. So a claim like, if we didn't disapprove of slavery, then slavery wouldn't be wrong. Okay, the quasi-realist thinks that moral judgments are expressions of our attitudes. So how can it make sense to say that moral truths are independent of our attitudes? How can it make sense to deny S? Well, the usual move here is to argue that what might initially seem like realist metaphysical claims are in fact more like normative commitments. So Blackburn says that the problem with S is that it expresses a repugnant moral responsibility. So we can think about this in terms of what exactly is it to reject S? When I say that S is wrong, what is it that I'm expressing? Well, first of all, when I say that S is wrong, I'm expressing disapproval of slavery. But moreover, I'm expressing disapproval of those sensibilities which require beliefs about people's attitudes to slavery in order to yield disapproval of slavery. So somebody who endorses S, right, somebody who says, if we didn't disapprove of slavery, then slavery wouldn't be wrong. That person may disapprove of slavery, but they make their disapproval of slavery contingent on the wrong thing. So we might think part of what it is for me to judge that slavery is morally wrong is also to judge that were my attitudes to change, were I to come to endorse slavery, I would then have a repugnant sensibility. My disapproval of slavery includes a disapproval of those sensibilities that do not disapprove of slavery. Basically, even if I imagine a world in which everybody feels that slavery is permissible, I still disapprove of slavery in this world. My attitudes still clash with the attitudes of that world. That's why I reject S. Instead I say slavery would be wrong, even if nobody believed it would be wrong, even if nobody believed it was wrong. What I'm expressing when I reject propositions such as S is a higher order attitude, an attitude about attitudes. I approve of those moral attitudes that, given the cruelty, oppression, and arbitrariness of slavery, yield the judgment that slavery is wrong. I disapprove of attitudes that, given the cruelty, oppression, and arbitrariness of slavery, do not yield the judgment that slavery is wrong unless further information about people's attitudes to slavery is provided, right? Like the person who accepts S, if you show them a world in which everybody endorses slavery, right, don't change anything else about what slavery is actually like. We're imagining an institution that is just as cruel, inhumane, arbitrary, whatever. It's just that everybody accepts it in this world. Well, the defender of S will say, yeah, in that world, slavery isn't wrong. But that's morally repugnant. The cruelty of slavery should be enough. If that's not enough for you to judge that slavery is wrong, you have a repugnant sensibility. So Blackburn thinks actually the quasi-realist should indeed reject claims such as S, claims such as if we didn't disapprove of slavery, then slavery wouldn't be wrong. And with that, we have the idea that the moral facts are independent of people's attitudes. That's the idea, anyway. Okay, so that's quasi-realism. Now, there is I guess a major objection to all of this, which is the challenge of moral relativism. So how does the quasi-realist overcome relativism? I mean, there's a worry here that, so I guess the fundamental worry about moral relativism is if somebody has different attitudes to me, aren't their views going to be just as legitimate as mine, right? Like a standard realist can say no, right, because there's this external authority, right? There's an external set of facts against which moral views are being judged, right? But that's not the case on quasi-realism, or at least okay, you can have those facts, but you have to kind of build up to them from the basis of our attitudes. The facts don't exist as this external authority. So in fact, there are two ways to kind of push the relativist challenge. In the first place, it might be that a person differs from me with respect to their fundamental values. So when I defined the best possible set of attitudes M, I did so in terms of these standards of information, sensitivity, maturity, imagination, coherence. But what if somebody rejects these, or understands them in a different way to me? Maybe Verity endorses slavery because she just has radically different values to me. Maybe Verity doesn't care about acquiring information or being sensitive to other people's perspectives, or having coherent views, right? Maybe Verity just says, yeah, I don't care about that stuff, right? And that's why she endorses slavery. Okay, there are a few points that Blackburn makes here. So in the first place, we have to, formulate this threat of relativism carefully. A relativist is going to say something like, okay, for us, it's true that slavery is impermissible. For Verity, it's true that slavery is permissible. Now, one thing to notice is even if you accept this tells us nothing more, really, than what we already knew. Verity endorses slavery and we do not. And importantly, this does nothing to show what the rest of us should think about slavery. It does nothing to put slavery in a favourable light. Indeed, there is nothing to put slavery in a favourable light because all the arguments in favour of slavery are bad arguments, while there are very good arguments against it. So we can show that it's incorrect to defend slavery. The fact that Verity endorses slavery is neither here nor there. Now, of course, from a deflationary point of view, right, well, when we say, for Verity, it's true that slavery is permissible, well, I mean, where's that coming from, right? From a deflationary point of view, it's true that slavery is wrong. Why? Well, because slavery is wrong, right? That's it. And it's not like things are different for Verity. No, slavery is wrong, right? So it's true that slavery is wrong. So insofar as Verity says slavery is permissible, she's mistaken. And I mean, that's thinking of it in terms of the semantics, but we can also show that in her endorsement of slavery, Verity fails to be properly objective. Why? Well, because she ignores the point of view of the enslaved. She fails to see or fails to take account of the effect of slavery on their autonomy and so on. She is ignorant of the possibilities of life that are open to the enslaved, to the things they could achieve were they given control over their own futures. She draws arbitrary distinctions because in determining which people are and are not appropriate subjects of slavery, she's going to end up discriminating on the basis of arbitrary characteristics. She fails to see how enslaving others hardens the hearts of slavers, reduces their capacities for sensitivity and compassion. Now, Verity herself may be happy with all of this. She might say that she disagrees with our fundamental values, so she doesn't care about basing her moral attitudes on true beliefs. She doesn't care about the fact that she makes arbitrary distinctions, and so on. Now, this might explain why she endorses slavery, but it does nothing to show that she is in any sense correct in doing so. On the contrary, it shows us why she's incorrect, right? So, in reasoning in this way, Verity's making an error. She's failing to evaluate slavery objectively. It's easy enough to say what is wrong with slavery. Slavery is cruel, inhumane, rests on arbitrary distinctions, often rests on false empirical claims, and so on. Now, one thing we might debate, right? We might debate whether slavery really does exhibit these features. Verity might argue that, well, actually, slavery can be compassionate, right? Maybe the point of slavery is to, take savage races and, teach them civilized ways and, bring them to a point where, that kind of... I think people used to make arguments like that in the past, right? So maybe she'll make that kind of argument. Or maybe she'll say that slavery doesn't rest on arbitrary distinctions. Well, in that case, we sort of have a debate, right? But suppose Verity says, yeah, enslaving people is cruel, but I just don't care. Or, yeah, enslaving people requires making arbitrary distinctions, but I just don't care. Well, in that case... I guess there's not really any debates to be had. Verity has just told us what is wrong with her position. It's kind of analogous to someone saying, yeah, all of the evidence points to the Earth being a globe, but I don't care, I'm going to believe it's flat anyway. What is there to be said to such a person, right? So that would be I suppose it'd be very strange, right? It would be bizarre for somebody to say that, but it's not like we're committed to saying that in any sense their beliefs are true. No, they're wrong. And actually what they've done is express why they are wrong. They haven't done anything to defend their position. There's another way of pushing this worry about relativism, if we're thinking of, a distinction in fundamental values. The worry might be that if Verity disagrees with our fundamental values, then the quasi-realist is going to have no way of guaranteeing that we can change her mind, right? There's no external authority to which we can appeal to show that she's wrong, and there's no way for us to generate an argument that we can be sure will be persuasive to Verity. So it's almost as if people who have differences, different fundamental values, they sort of lie on these separate intellectual islands, each unable to get any rational grip on the other. Now. Blackburn talks a bit about this. He grants that this is true, but then he just points out that this threat isn't unique to quasi-realism. In fact, this is the case for all of our beliefs and commitments. When two people differ on a factual question, like whether or not God exists, or whether macroevolution proceeds through phyletic gradualism or punctuated equilibrium, or whether the Earth is a globe, or whether the Pfizer vaccine is safe and effective as a prevention of coronavirus, right? If two people disagree on these issues, there's not going to be any sure way of getting them to see the truth. And if you find somebody whose worldview is radically different from your own, whose very standards of evaluation differ, right? If you find somebody who just doesn't care about consistency or something like that, well, there just might not be any room for rational debate there. You might not be able to get through to them. It's hard enough to get through to people whose beliefs are similar to yours. If people differ with respect to fundamental values, there isn't going to be any way of there isn't necessarily going to be any surefire way of persuading them. But that's the case for everything, right? So that's the case for all our beliefs. So we shouldn't expect the quasi-realist to be able to offer a recipe for changing people's minds. Nobody can do that, right? And so that's not a if this is in any way suggestive of relativism. This is not a threat that is unique to quasi-realism. Robust realists have this same problem. There's a second way to run the concern about relativism. Suppose we share our fundamental values, so we are in agreement on Blackburn's list of standards by which we evaluate moral attitudes. Well, now the concern is that there's not just one way that our set of attitudes might improve per these standards. So there might be both M and M star, where M and M star are both equally best possible sets of attitudes, but they make conflicting judgments. Like, why shouldn't moral attitudes diverge, right? So if we take our current moral sensibility to be imperfect, it seems like there are lots of different directions it could go to improve. So there's no unique M. And I mean, I guess this is going to be a sort of tempered relativism, right? Like, there will be plenty of sets of attitudes that, per these standards, are just really crappy. But even so, there's not going to be like a unique best set, right? So there's not going to be like one unique set of moral truths. Well, Blackburn's response to this is just to deny that this is possible. He says, actually, no, there can't be two equally good sets of attitudes that conflict with each other in this kind of way. So consider an analogy with aesthetic sensibilities. This is discussed in Miller's Introduction to Metaethics. Barry loves 18th century music, and he names Mozart's The Marriage of Figaro as the greatest opera ever. Terence loves 19th century music, and he names Wagner's Tristan and Isolde as the greatest opera ever. And as I'm saying this, it occurs to me that I probably should have looked up how to pronounce the names of those operas before I recorded this, so I may be pronouncing those incorrectly, but, well, never mind. Anyway, both Barry and Terence admire each other's critical capacities. They're both widely recognised as having refined aesthetic sensibilities. It may be that there is nobody else we could turn to, nobody better placed to adjudicate the disagreement. So let's say that B stands for Barry's sensibility, T stands for Terence's sensibility. So it seems that we have, first, B contains the attitudes expressed by Mozart's Marriage of Figaro is the greatest opera ever. 2. T contains the attitudes expressed by Wagner's Tristan and Isolde is the greatest opera ever. And then 3. There is no possible improvement in either B or T. Well, Blackburn would say the problem lies with 3. There is a possible improvement over both B and T, because Barry knows that Terence is just as well informed, just as mature, just as sensitive, and so on as he is. Barry takes Terence to be his equal with respect to aesthetic appreciation, and likewise, Terence feels this way of Barry. So, in that case, there is an improvement over B and T. We just need to have to come up with some aesthetic sensibility that takes into account both judgments. So what we should say is not that Figaro is better than Tristan or that Tristan is better than Figaro. Instead, we should say Tristan and Figaro are operas of equal merit, each of which exemplifies paradigm aspects of distinct types of operas in distinct periods of history. A sensibility that contains this attitude, which recognises them as of equal merit but exemplifying different types of opera, that sensibility improves over B and T. And it precisely because it resolves the tension between B and T. So there's a couple of concerns about this, I think. I mean, first of all, I think we can object, well, like, all right, why are we required to make this move? I mean, if you think of it from Barry's point of view, well, given his constitution, his desires and his preferences, he would surely have to judge that certain musical periods are inferior, right? In which case, there's going to be no pressure to grant that the operas are of equal merit. So Wagner's opera may well best exemplify the 19th century style, but, like, again, from Barry's point of view, again, given his, just, I guess, the way he is, the way his constitution and preferences are, that's an inferior style, right? Like, he prefers the 18th century stuff. But more importantly, it's not really clear, like, even if we are all required to make this move, it's not clear how this overcomes relativism, because how should we apply this to the moral case, right? Like, let's imagine this is a moral disagreement instead of an aesthetic disagreement. So again, Barry and Terence are both, like, they both share their fundamental standards, and moreover, they're both very careful reasoners, both very mature and sensitive and fully informed and so on. Both are judged among the best ethical reasoners of their time, and each recognises the other as being a peer. But they disagree with respect to their evaluation of, say, abortion. Barry thinks abortion is wrong, Terence thinks it's permissible. So if we apply this move, right, if like this, the move that was applied in the aesthetic case, it looks like we should say, okay, both the judgment that abortion is wrong and the judgment that abortion is permissible are of equal merit. It's just that these different moral judgments best exemplify different value systems. I mean, obviously that's gotten us nowhere. That just reinforces the relativist challenge. I mean, this is particularly problematic in the moral case because part of the point of moral discourse is to help us figure out what to do. If a woman is pregnant and is considering whether to have an abortion, it's not going to be any use to be told that, oh well, abortion is wrong and abortion is permissible are of equal merit per different value systems. She would need to know what her value system would require. But, you know, I mean, like, I guess by stipulation in this case, we're like supposed to be imagining a case where her value system is imperfect and it could be improved in either direction. So like, or at least it seems like that's the case. And then so to be told, well, you know, actually the best value system is one that recognises the legitimacy of both of these judgments, doesn't get you anywhere. So, you know, there may still be a relativist challenge here for the quasi-realist. But that's all I wanted to talk about today. So I'm going to end the video here. Goodbye. Thank you for watching.